We're so delighted to have Dr. Jamie Gates with us. Dr. Jamie Gates is a professor at Point Loma Nazarene and a human trafficking expert with multiple accomplishments in the anti-trafficking field. Praise God for that. God bless you for that. He's co-leading a groundbreaking research project in 2016 and the founding of the Human Trafficking Research and Data Advisory Roundtable for San Diego County. He's done all that. Tonight, Dr. Gates will be honoring us with a talk he calls Settling In for the Long Haul. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jamie Gates.
Thank you, Cy. This is a great privilege for me to be up here in this space with you. Thank you. Thank you, Grace, for the early work and for your ongoing leadership. Amy, thank you for this invitation to come and speak. I feel a particular kinship with you and your work, especially coming from the heart of faith. I teach at Point Loma Nazarene University. I'm a ordained minister in the Church of the Nazarene. I won't go through all that history and how we are similar and how we are different, but it is just good to be here with a room full of people who care about God, who care about the world, who care about the suffering of the world through the Immaculate Heart. Immaculate Heart. Children of the heart of Mary, children of the heart of Christ. I love how in your mission statement, in the mission statement of the organization, it says that they hope that survivors of trafficking can live not only in physical freedom, but that they will encounter the love of Jesus Christ and discover true freedom of being children of God, the God who heals us through his wounds. So, us followers of Jesus believe in Jesus as the Son of God, the God incarnate, the incarnate, the infleshed one, right? And we believe that God suffered here with us and for us. This is the same Jesus that challenges us tonight to align our hearts and our hands with the Immaculate Heart, to deeply identify with the suffering of others, the suffering of people who have been sex trafficked, to maybe even put our bodies on the lines for the sake of those who suffer, and to help, as Jesus did, the God of the universe that knit the stars in the sky, who chose to become one of us to relieve our suffering. So why are you here tonight? What prompted you to be here rather than at your favorite restaurant waiting for the band to play to play out the night for you? What prompted you to postpone that dinner invitation with friends? The ones that you were probably going to yuck it up with late into the evening. Maybe they're here with you tonight, and that would be beautiful. But what prompted you to be here tonight instead of curling up on the couch with your favorite Netflix and your favorite pint of, well, it could be pint of lots of things, but pint of ice cream, let's say, and that favorite salty snack and that favorite salty person of yours? Let's be real. A night focused on sexual exploitation? Not exactly dinner conversation, right? Ever try to bring up this conversation in polite settings, right? None of us want to dwell on other people's suffering for too long. Most of us drive by an accident on the highway and we'll slow down just long enough and rubberneck a little bit of morbid curiosity, but then we move on and we assume, now somebody else has got it, right? They've got it, and we move on. I'm particularly curious, what gets people to get involved in countering the dark world of sex trafficking? And in particular, what gets people to stay involved over time for the long haul? Tonight, you took the first step, and for many of you, this isn't the first step. It's the next step. But tonight, you at least took a step. You're here on a night when most people would be elsewhere having fun to decompress from their week, the stress, anxiety, their own work and their own personal lives, and we know there's plenty out there to be stressed about. You took the risk tonight to be that friend that brings up the hard stuff. I don't know if you knew this coming in, but being here tonight means that you risk being Debbie Downer. Anybody know who Debbie Downer is? Right? In your friendship group, when your friends ask why you postponed dinner to their place tonight, were some of you like, did you know that sexual slavery is happening right here in your backyard? Wah, wah. Debbie Downer. Any Saturday Night Live fans out there? I'm sorry, I know that's a little risque show, but Saturday Night Live, Debbie Downer, you know who I'm talking about, right? Ben Affleck has the birthday party, right? And everybody's, hey, everybody wants some cake, right? Everybody's, yeah, I want some cake. And Debbie Downer's like, I will pass on the cake because it causes diabetes, and we have an epidemic of youth diabetes. Wah, wah. Or you ask her about cats, and she's like, did you know that the number one reason that cats die is because of feline AIDS? So, if you've been paying attention to the realities of sex trafficking for any amount of time, you know that the trauma is heavy, that manipulation runs deep, that the grooming that happens to lure young people in is clever and alluring. You know that the demand for sex is larger than any of us want to admit. What we're talking about tonight is a deep, dark, pernicious evil. And what if the most essential skill you need to combat sex trafficking is to just stop and pay attention a little bit longer? To not look away, to not just drive by, but to stop. And then to lean in just a little. So I commend you tonight for stopping, for listening just for a second. Indulge me for a moment, even if you think I'm going to be the Debbie Downer tonight, because I want to work on this skill to pause and listen to the depth of the darkness. In our research, we listened to over 700 women arrested for prostitution across 10 years. Over half of these women were brave enough to admit they had been trafficked. They had some type of commercial sex by force, fraud, or coercion. The dark reality, most victims of sex trafficking in San Diego County were first trafficked as young teenagers. We interviewed 54 traffickers, and the money being made in trafficking is staggering, and it's hidden. Victims can be earning thousands of dollars a week per trafficker. Per person trafficked, and traffickers often have 3 or 4 persons that they're trafficking at a time. So the money being made here is rather staggering. The dark reality is that it is profoundly difficult for victims of human trafficking to step out into the light. Victims often blame themselves and therefore do not see themselves as victims and wouldn't think to come forward in the first place. Victims often will be in some level of fear of retribution, fear of violence, fear of retribution on their families, fear of retribution on the people that they're also being trafficked alongside, who become like pseudo-family for them over time. There's a lot of fear. And victims often carry such deep shame that the shame itself prevents them from telling anybody about what's going on, making it an even more hidden reality. Wah, wah. Jamie, too heavy? Let me go a little heavier. Maybe you came tonight for an in-depth story from a survivor and how they overcame. I am desperate to hear how survivors overcome. I don't speak for survivors, nor do I think any of us should. But I have been interviewing those who've been more resilient and how they found resilience. And I've had dozens of survivor friends, some of whom are willing to tell their story to help raise awareness. Some are telling their stories because they found in their healing, it's part of their healing, and they have come out of something horrendous, and God is helping to heal them by telling their story. There isn't even, I don't know if you know this, but there's a survivor leader network in San Diego County of dozens of, mostly women, some men, but dozens of mostly women who are binding together, supporting one another, and are trying to make a difference as leaders in this movement. But I have yet to meet a survivor telling their story for whom it does not exact a significant toll on them personally and on their ability to thrive. One of my closest survivor friends, early on especially, I'll call her Jade. Jade thought she was ready to be speaking publicly about what had happened to her. I thought Jade was ready. We all thought Jade was ready. Jade began going public with her story, and I was right there encouraging her, supporting her all along the way. I was director of this Point Loma's Center for Justice and Reconciliation at the time, and I opened up doors, set up speaking engagements for her. Everybody wanted to hear Jade speak. She had such a compelling story. We were all desperate, as I'm sure in this room even, we're desperate to hear survivor stories. Jade's story was profound, going from victim to survivor to thriver. And that gives us hope when we hear that. But Jade crashed and burned along the way. Her demons haunted her in the background all along, and they began to overwhelm her. All of the public speaking that she did amplified her insecurities, and being in the spotlight put so much pressure on her to be like a superhero and not just human like the rest of us. And I kind of demanded that, drew that out of her because I was so hungry to hear these stories. It turns out healing is really complicated, and it's multidimensional. And it takes a very long time, and it is rarely linear. It rarely happens in an easy upward trajectory. Wah, wah. Hang in with me a little bit more. If you haven't driven off yet or tuned out, looking evil right in the eye means seeing the sophistication of the recruitment tactics that are going on. How many of you have seen Liam Neeson's Taken movies, or maybe the more recent The Sound of Freedom, and you're like, that must be what trafficking is. Like, it's violent, it's grab, it's go, it's throw in a van. I wish I could say that's mostly, and most of you in this room probably already know by now, that's a Hollywoodized version of what trafficking is. That by far more common, and I would say at many levels far more dangerous, is the trafficking that happens by boyfriending and befriending. By being offered a surrogate family when your own is broken, by being psychologically wooed into the arms of someone who seems safer than your other options, or by being lured by wealth and a lifestyle that you could never attain on your own. That's the type of grooming that is happening far more often in our neighborhoods. I don't have time tonight to walk us through in detail the complex psychological games that go on in grooming, nor do I have time to explain the knots of long-term, those knots, I'm going to call them knots, the knots of long-term psychological damage that seem near impossible to untangle, but you should spend some time studying that if you have started to care about those who are abused in this way. But one more layer. Hang with me, just one more layer. And this one hits really close to home. We would not have people being exploited for commercial sex if we did not have a very large market of buyers in San Diego County. And buyers are, frankly, mostly men. Many of them look like me. But it's men from all backgrounds. And, well, I was on a sting up in Vista here with the sheriff's department a few years ago, and all 5 men we arrested that night who were when I say a sting, they put out false ads and they lure men in who are wanting to buy sex. All 5 men, that could have been your cousin, that could have been the person I sit next to in church. It could have been somebody's uncle in this room in terms of, you look at their demographics. I worked with a bunch of guys that created a computer program to put out decoy sex ad, much like the law enforcement does. They ran their false ads on this computer program. They could pop it up at any time, at any conference we were at, and I was at breakfast with them, lunch meetings, and dinner meetings with them, and anytime they popped that laptop open and click their computer program on that shot out ads, including ads for underage sex for sale, you'd hear this bing, 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 calls coming in at any time of the day, any day of the week. We have this massive market demand for commercial sex that doesn't let up. Wah, wah. Okay, Jamie, wait. Take a deep breath with me for a second. Not literally. A crime where the perpetrator and the victim are both trying to hide the reality. Victimization where the victim is unlikely to even recognize that they are a victim and even less likely to come forward. An alluring amount of money that would tempt any of us. A seemingly unbounded and unending number of potential buyers getting in line. And for those who make it out, a journey of tenderly addressing traumatic psychological and social knots that take years, maybe a lifetime, to untangle. Too heavy. for any one of us to bear. Love that we have Mardi Gras theme here tonight. What's Wednesday? Good Catholics? Ash Wednesday. The start of Lent, right? It's a season where Christians very intentionally examine the brokenness of our lives in the world, right? For 40 days, plus Sundays. We put ashes on our forehead to remind us of our finitude, that we were created from dust, and to dust we shall return. We spend 40 days reminding of the God who walks with us in our suffering. Many of us fast as a part of this discipleship, and that fasting is a way for us to identify with not just our own finitude, but other people's suffering as well. So you're about to enter a season where this is a good thing to do. It turns out millennia of Christian thought and practice has taught us that being Debbie Downer is an important part of bringing healing to a broken world. If you'd have the resilience to be that person that says, hey, have you heard? But of course, we also know that the story doesn't end in darkness, but in light. Every year we practice moving through the darkness of Ash Wednesday, through the fasting of Lent, looking deep into our own brokenness and the brokenness of the world, all the way to death on a cross, tortured death of Christ on the cross. That's as dark as it gets. You practice every year going into the darkness and staying there for a while. That's a skill you need if we're going to do something about sex trafficking. But when we're done Lent, there's Good Friday. We kind of know the end of the story, which is Easter, the resurrection, the gift of new life. So I'm in this middle of this book right now, writing stories of those who've been in the movement for a long time and what keeps them going. And I sat down and I got bowled over by, I realized that there are 10 sectors of people in San Diego County working against human trafficking, from healthcare to law enforcement to primary, tertiary, secondary education, to the social workers, to the organization that you're here to support tonight. 10 sectors of people. I had 75 people's cell phone numbers in my networks of people who I began to think about who's been in this for a while. How on earth did they stay in this work? It's dark work. It's heavy work. And I've been asking them, what got you into this work and what keeps you in this work for the long haul? Well, I don't want to keep you here all night, but I wish I had time to tell you about this little girl from Hartford, Connecticut, who would tag along with her dad as he made insurance elevator repair calls in downtown hotels. The trans and women streetwalkers knew his first name, not because he was a client, but because he knew their first name and treated them as human beings. Deputy District Attorney Mary Ellen Barrett, this was her father, uses this experience with her father as an inspiration to help train law enforcement officers that the people on the streets are people first, victims, and not necessarily first and foremost perpetrators of crime. She's made a shift in the way that police look at victims of human trafficking. I wish I had time to tell you about this El Cajon high school student who grew up with a really rough childhood, whose mother left the family when she was in middle school, dropped out of high school at 17. Janae Luttrell eventually found her way back to school, wandered through 2 community colleges and SDSU, became an educator herself, and was paying attention to girls in the bathrooms of the 2 high schools she was working at in East County, Santana, Chaparral, you know these schools? And there was recruitment going on. Some of you might remember the big case that came out of this in 2014 called the Tycoons case. But it was this teacher who was listening to her students, took her life as a teacher, aimed it just a little bit in the right direction. This opened the door. Eventually, she wrote the first sex trafficking prevention protocols for the U.S. Department of Education. Janae settled in for the long haul because she found inspiration in the resilience of her students. I won't keep you here all night, but if I just had the time, I'd tell you about this baby sister from rural Oklahoma and Texas whose mother was abusive to her, whose father an angry racist, a Methodist church-going family. She was molested at age 5 by friends of her parents, raped at age 12 by a high school male, left home 3 days after graduating high school. Most of her life, she was on the streets. She was either being sold or selling herself. But today, Kathy Hardy has been the most significant leader of survivors, the survivor leader who came out of the life on the streets. And what motivates Kathy to stay in it for the long haul certainly was partly her own hard experience. But Kathy sees those who are engaged or those who've been victimized as her sisters. And what she told me was, look, when you're helping your family, you stay in it for the long haul. I'll tell you about one more person. I wish I had the time to tell you about this Egyptian American drama queen who left her beloved theater community in New York to grow community-based interactive justice theater here in San Diego. Catherine Hannah Schrock, motivated by her faith, her passion for social justice, she thinks about this drama work that she does as a prophetic imagination. This core belief that the good society is one that cares most deeply for the most vulnerable in our midst. And she created No More, and she created Zion's Story, and these drama, they're now scattered all throughout our 42 school districts in San Diego County, getting prevention education because Catherine drew on this deep heart of faith that many of you in this room had said, I'm going to stick in it and with it. There are more stories to tell, but you've been hanging with me well here, and I know we got more to do tonight. But Mary Ellen, Janae, Kathy, Bianca, Amy, Catherine, each of these people I wanted to mention tonight, and some of whom I've told you about, recognize that it's worth risking being the Debbie Downer in the room. They're normal people, taking who they are and what they have in their hands and the work that they love or that they're gifted to do, the space that they're in, and they said, oh, I see you. I see the victimizations that are happening. I want to do something about it. Every one of you in this room has that space, those gifts in your hands, ready. So what's the next step for you? What's the next step to lean in just a little bit further? You don't have to be heroic about this. What's the next step? We need you to step further in. We need you to stay in it for the long haul. Your willingness to dig deep, to look at the complexity, to be willing to sit in that Lenten space, see just how dark it gets. And then to be those people of faith that know that the darkness is not the end of the story. What comes next? The healing, the salvation, the eyes lifted up from the ugly onto the horizon of God's peace and God's goodness. Okay, if this helps, that sound I was making earlier, wah, wah. You can say that now if you want, because this has been a pretty heavy conversation tonight, right? You know, with musicians, I wanted to ask these guys, you know, what do you call that interval? Anybody know? That interval is a tritone. A tritone. So wah, wah, it's three, what is it? 6 semitones, right? So 3 whole notes. Wah, wah. Well, I don't know if you know, good Catholics here, this was an interval banned by the church from the Middle Ages all the way through the 19th century because of its tension. They called it the devil's interval. I know, now I'm stepping in a mess. But contemporary musicians found tritones to be beautiful ways to help people pay closer attention to, frankly, tension in music. To not always have to have your music easily resolved, like, I've been dreaming of my true love's kiss, right? You know, the kind of, Hallmark kind of music that easily resolves into a beautiful scenario, right? The tritones are a lot in blues and jazz and that music that catches your attention because it's like, please resolve. Oh, thank you, right? Tritones. But tritones are also beautiful when used with hope in mind. How many of you have seen West Side Story? Seen West Side Story? Remember the music from West Side Story? You know the song Maria? Maria. Tritone. Before it resolves into Maria, Maria, right? It gets big and huge, but it draws you in by going, Maria. We need to find the beauty in the wah, wah. Risk being the Debbie Downer. We need you to dig deep inside, find what sources of inspiration will help you look deeper and stay in for the long haul. I'd say, since we're talking about Easter, and I got a good bunch of Catholic and Christians in the room here, I would say we need you to take what humble loaves and fishes you have to bring in your basket. And then we need to let God turn that into what can feed 5,000. 5,000 victims of sex trafficking here in San Diego County, because we know we have at least that many. Thank you for letting me be Debbie Downer tonight. Join me. Wah, wah. We try it one more time. Wah, wah. It's not a bad thing. Thank you.